was fascinating. Oh my goodness. Okay, I'll pass the mic around.
Zach, this is a question for you. Liability. I mean, you're marketing a product that, how do you cover that? How do you protect BLM against someone who may have, bikes and rocks? And how does everybody sleep at night with those two coming together?
Yeah, it's a good question, and one that we get all the time. We've got recreation use statutes that do protect public land managers from any sorts of accidents that could occur while people are recreating on public lands. And really, you can manage risk. You can manage risk through proper design, through proper signage, and through proper development of those trails. And you can't manage a hazard. So we draw a clear distinction, and we've seen that if we are very cognizant of the trail design process at the front end, then our liability and any potential risks that we're going to provide to the public is mitigated fivefold long term.
Does everybody sign a release or something before they go?
No release. Yeah.
Awesome presentations. All three of you maybe want to stand up and cheer, so yay. My question is about data, which is probably the least interesting part of what you talked about, but one of the most important. I know as an agency we are struggling, I work for the Forest Service, and we are struggling to make sure that we have accurate and complete data. So Zach, I wanted to ask you, when you all undertook the initiative to update the website and also to put together the manual, and I was talking to Aaron before, who you all partnered with for the trails, how long did it take you to collect and update your data so that it was at a level where it could be used by the public? What was your level of accuracy and completeness before you started the initiative? Yeah, and that's enough.
Yeah. So I'll just start with the caveat that our data it's bad, right? It's the best available data that we have. And all that information is pulled from our recreation management information system. So when I talk about 3.5 million annual riders and the increase that we've seen, we generate that information at the local level through inputting it into what we call REMIS. But we also know that we've got a lot of test trails across the United States where we are physically collecting trail data through trail counters. And we have done some beta testing in the Northwest to try to correlate crowdsourced information generated, for example, through Strava as an indicator of overall use that's occurring based on a physical trail counter location. And then if you extrapolate that, you have rough percentages that you can apply to other trails without the need to drop the investment to physically collect that data in the field. And so we're actually piloting that with Region 6 Forest Service in the Pacific Northwest through our new federal lands transportation bill, the collaborative long-range transportation planning, and federal highways to try to see if we can institutionalize kind of a standard to increase or decrease actually the costs for field collection. But same struggles that you all have with the Forest Service. Data collection on 247 million acres it's a challenge, so we try our best.
Alyssa, you have an interesting perspective, I think, that our group can benefit from in regards to what that middle space is finding attractive to users. It sounds like in some cases folks have some assets that you're helping monetize, and in other cases you're helping them figure that out. So with all the data you have, what are your visitors to those middle spaces looking for that could help inform this audience about things that people want in a camping experience?
Great question. Essentially, what's trending? Glamping is huge. I think when you talk about getting more people outside, there's a lot of people out there who have the intention and the desire. We've done a lot of studies that have shown for every one person who camps, there's between 8 and 10 who want to but don't. And that reason why they don't often comes down to, I don't have the gear. I mean, think about it. If you're not raised as a camper, that's a sleeping bag, a tent, a sleeping pad, a lantern, like that list can go and go. And so having some basic type of accommodation where someone without all that gear can still get outside is definitely the biggest trend we're seeing and what people are able to provide. I would say the other biggest one, and this may or may not be feasible for larger agencies, I'd have to think about it, is more privacy. People are happy to pay more for a site that isn't right next to other sites. So our average site price across the US right now is over $70. And a lot of those are just tent sites. And that's, we don't set those prices. Those are what the market is setting. And that's because a lot of these sites you're getting, a place in the redwoods where you're not, surrounded by lots of other people. So those would be the top two things I would point to right now.
So this is for Brett. I'm guessing in Florida they have free fishing days for kids where you don't have to buy the fishing license like they do in other states. So is iAngler something that's promoted along with that so kids can keep track of, and enter their data so they can be that citizen scientist to help contribute to the population, or?
Yeah, free fishing days is something that we have not been able to coordinate with the states just yet. It's something that's, I just was talking to them about on the last break. So I think it's going to happen. I see it as a great vehicle, and it's an opportunity to communicate in two directions. And people that are managing for invasive species and you're keeping track, there's so many different ways that getting those, broadening the footprint, getting more people involved will help. So I think it's just a matter of time.
I have a couple of questions. First of all, for Alyssa, what you're doing is very similar to Airbnb, but on a reduced. What's your desire? What's your vision for your growth? Because I just looked on your site, looked at the state of Kansas, and you have one of our campgrounds with a few. But are you actively soliciting additional private partners, which I think it would be kind of a cool thing? But are you guys actively pursuing that? And then I have a question for Zach.
Sure. So yeah, we're seeking hosts in any state. Right now we're actively recruiting around 8 major metropolitan areas. So Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, LA, Denver, Austin, and New York, Chicago. But looking to expand that as quickly as we can. We always just want to scale up demand and supply at the same time, so we make sure to create a really great experience for our hosts. And on the Airbnb question, I think there's definitely some shared commonalities in business model, but we've heard resoundingly from both the host side and the camper side that having a space that's really dedicated to nature and experiencing nature and getting outside is a really different use case, and people appreciate having a different platform.
I think it's really cool. And then Zach, my other question is for you. With respect to the resource guide that you guys put together, is that available for other agencies or potentially state to access, and can we get a copy of it?
Yeah, I actually forgot to mention that. Thank you. We do have it available in hard copies, and then we have it available online. It's online both through IMBA's website with a really a high-res edition that you can download, and then it's available on the BLM's website with a super low-res edition because we've got megabyte issues. Maybe we can make sure to get those links sent around to everybody here.
Other questions?
Hi, this is a question for Alyssa. You had mentioned that people are attracted to going camping at places where there's no crowds and neighboring campers. So do you have a mechanism, or does the owner of the land kind of drive the total number of people that they allow camping so it doesn't end up like Woodstock?
Great question.
Where you think 4 people show up, but 400 show up. So I imagine you have at least a reservation system.
Yeah, so we've got the full booking and reservation system built in. So the host says how many people are okay, and if you want to bring extra people, how much it costs, or or maybe it's not okay, and we let them decide kind of what their comfort level is with the capacity. We do advise them to space the sites out because we see that just makes such a difference in, you know, what people are interested in.
And then one other quick question. I'm from Wisconsin, and we just had a big, I guess, I don't remember who won this argument, but the difference between campsites and temporary building structures like RVs and things like that, whether or not they allow people to not pay taxes and stay year-round, and if that's considered a permanent structure. So are you running into any issues similar to like VRBO and Airbnb where you have zoning ordinances that might guide that as an allowable use? And I'm not saying it shouldn't be done. I think this is a great idea, but is that one of the obstacles or challenges that you're facing as you grow?
Yeah, another great question. Not yet. I do anticipate that will be a challenge, and we're going to be proactive there. As for now, what we're seeing is that because our use is so different than, say, like a VRBO or an Airbnb tends to be taking up housing that arguably could be used for local residents. And so that tends to create some concern, whereas what we're doing is in general nothing anyone would ever want to permanently stay in. So there's not a, I guess, like a natural competitor or someone who's really speaking out against it. But as we get bigger, I anticipate we will proactively seek out some kind of regulation in that way.
Is there a question over here? While I'm walking, can you talk about the data on the repeat visitors you have versus sort of one time in each area?
I'll start with that, sure. We get a lot of one hits. We don't get as many as we used to, as we've kind of developed it and tried to make it more user-friendly or more functional for the individuals. But sometimes it's hard to track because a lot of fishermen want to go fishing every weekend, but they go once every 3 or 4 months. So the University of Florida just did a study of all of our users, and they got a really good response, around 1,000 in the first week. And a lot of those people we thought were one-hit wonders were people that said, no, I've only gone fishing once in the past 3 months. But, you know, we just are constantly trying to improve the product and keep people coming back for more.
Yeah, and I think on the trail side, you know, depending on where you're at within the United States, we definitely have some trails that are close to urban areas that have a lot of repeat visitation. I mean, these are areas where people want to go to connect with nature literally 3, 4, 5, 6 days a week to walk their dog or to ride their mountain bike or to go hiking. And as you radiate out farther away into some of the more rural areas and you've got a really high quality experience, we do see those driving kind of destination travel and tourism patterns. You know, but for example, outside of Portland, Oregon, we've got a trail system that's 15 total miles, and it has 120,000 riders that go there annually, which is just a result of its proximity to an urban area and the type of experience that it provides. So it just varies.
Really similar to Brett's answer, how we expect people to use the platform has been something we're learning. But right now we're at about 1 in 5 campers who have booked again to date.
My question is for Zach, and specific to technology that's coming out. And one of the big things in the mountain biking world right now are e-bikes and electric assisted bikes. And they're building these mountain bikes now that are essentially motorcycles with electric motors. Have you looked at how you're going to handle that on the trails? Because obviously it's going to affect the trail differently when somebody has, you know, torque as they're going through a corner and such. Have you considered those impacts on your trails?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have. I got an e-bike recently, and I've been doing some beta testing on it. And we actually did a study in partnership with IMBA at a trail system in Oregon to look at what are the actual physical impacts. And we tested a 250 two-stroke KTM motorcycle and an e-bike that was not throttle assist, it was pedal assist, up to about 200 watts. And we tested a traditional, you know, human-powered pedal assist mountain bike. And so the physical impacts are very much similar between a pedal assisted mountain bike and a pedal assist e-bike. The difference that we're very cautious about moving forward is the social impacts. And you remember I showed some of that spectrum, right? Everybody in here is probably pretty familiar with the recreation opportunity spectrum. Well, the BLM's got their own derivative of that called the recreation setting characteristics spectrum, but it goes from urban to primitive, and certain types of activities are more appropriate depending on what setting that you find yourself within. Now with e-bikes, we want to make sure that everybody has a setting where they can get the type of experience that they want. So we don't want to blur the lines between mechanized, human-powered travel and motorized travel. So the BLM clarified our position on e-bike management 2 years ago through an information memorandum out of our Washington offices that even though it is pedal assisted, it's still a motor. And so we're going to manage it under our motorized use regulations that give us the flexibility to plan and design trails accordingly. But at this point, it's not allowed on non-motorized trails that exist on BLM lands. And we're currently looking at what are the social impacts, though, so that we can better plan for it into the future. But it is definitely an emerging activity that we're seeing.
I think the presentations were awesome, and they sort of speak to a certain common theme that I noticed here that I feel like there might be a place for, as well as combining those, is that what we're talking about with using technology is really creating, like the BLM's guide there, is a quality trail experience. Because what I've been saying for a long time is that, and maybe the mountain bikers noticed this maybe before others, or maybe it's just been something that we've jumped on, is that all the access in the world is useless if you go there and the experience stinks, because you're not going to go back there. So you sort of you don't really enjoy that, and you don't want to go back. So that access sort of disappears. And what the guide here and all of these websites and efforts have in common is that they're trying to create a quality experience. Somebody wants to know ahead of time where they're going to camp, and they want to be able to choose to be able to get somewhere where there's no one else, and they'll pay a premium for that. The trail guide is creating what it is that the mountain bikers want, so that they're not going to go and create illegal trails somewhere else, because the trail that just went in and took years to create wasn't what they were hoping for. Not everybody rides like those pictures were showing either, so just so you know. But those are certain places, and they have a rightful place to have that, and then other trails are different. In the fishing, you're not going to go back there if every time you go there and you cast, you don't catch anything. And so what you're trying to do is create citizen scientists, in a way, by collecting the data that then can go to the agency to help them manage the resource and half of that. So all this technology is leading to crowdsourcing from the people who are there using it and know most about these opportunities, and helping aid the managers in doing that. But the one thing that's missing is, I don't know about the rest of you, when you go on vacation, you might not just do one activity. You probably do multiple activities, because you're a person that likes to do many things. So you might fish one day, you might ride a bike another day, canoe, hike, and you're doing that all from your camping site that you each day on day trips. What we almost need is the agencies. Not every one of these is going to create the mountain biking sources of information on the fishing website and vice versa, but we almost see that the agencies offer all these things in the full spectrum that they do manage. And it would be great to have all these sites linked to on these major agencies, so that as the tourist goes to this agency and they know they're going to state park or a federal land, they can see all the different sources that will get them the experience they want. That will help management. I think that will help the resource in protecting it, because now you're going to really guide people to where they wanted to go anyways. And then you can start to see the trends, and then you can keep the best and rehab the rest that's not really being used anyways. That's maybe costing time and money, and you're just not having the data on where that is. So I don't know if there's an effort within the agencies, or if somebody could speak to that, and what's the barriers of putting these kinds of sites linked to on the website. But I know the BLM has been doing this with the MTV project and been quite happy with that result in some sense. So I don't know if there's statements or agreement or disagreement.
Well, I don't know if I was going to speak directly to what you said, but one of the things that we've learned over the past 6 or 7 years trying to develop these things that have more function for the anglers, and that's really a key component for a lot of reasons. One is, if fishermen are using this data themselves to improve their fishing trips, they're going to be more accurate with their information, which makes it more useful for the fisheries managers. Trying to get, the language between those two groups, zero catch trips and a skunk day on the water, it's the same thing, but they just don't communicate that same way. On the other side of that is, you try to do too many things in a one-stop shop, and it loses its functionality with the individual. So I think that would be actually a really good idea, to have some place they could go. I can get the lunar information from my app, but I have an app for that's faster, because I can go right to it. If I'm in it, I'll use it for tides and some other things. But if I'm picking up my phone to look at tides, I have a tide app. It's just faster, because that's all it does. So you have to kind of figure out who you're going to compete with, who you're not going to compete with as far as getting people's attention together. But I do think having some place where they go, instead of having to search the App Store and you get lost in a sea of thousands of opportunities, I think that's a great idea. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think I would just echo that. I mean, I think there is a need for that, and I see the value. I'm just not sure, who would take on that as the platform to develop. I know that the BLM, like any other federal land management agency in the room, has limited resources, limited staff, and so instead of trying to take a whole elephant down at one time, we're just trying to bite off small pieces. But maybe over time, all those activities can be merged together and communicated kind of at that landscape level across multiple activities. So I would agree there's value. It's just we're moving in that direction, slowly but surely.
I would just add that mega apps, to your point, they don't ever work, but like resource directories could. So maybe something more in that direction. That just is a little tricky maybe, because I think if the government is pulling together the resource, there's an implied endorsement, and then the government's taking on the work of saying, no, this is a good one, this isn't a good one, or so it sounds like it would be a challenge, but it's a great idea.
Just to that, on that phone call I had in that last break, with the guy from FWC, who's the deputy something or other of the who's a whatcha, and he said, yeah, we were just talking to some fishermen down in Southwest Florida, and I'm going to send you a formal request for some data. But we were kind of talking about your app, and I realized we didn't have anything to hand out. So I said, well, can I give you something? And he said, well, we probably have to develop it, because I've got 17 attorneys that are going to have to look at it first if it's coming from somebody on the outside. So there's definitely barriers between here and there, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't work towards trying to figure that out.
Since I'm not on the panel, I can't answer the question, so I'll ask an inquiry. How important is it for the federal agencies to steward high-quality data in an open environment, so those that develop apps, like the hackathons we've seen, can develop apps for that to address the question? Any thoughts from the panel?
I'll go there first. I think that's huge. If there was a national standard for recreational angler data collection when we started, it would have saved us probably a couple $100,000 in development that was not quite on target. And we still don't have that. That's something that we're working with NOAA to try to develop. Part of the reason is that the fisheries data, unlike biking, or there's an app called eBird, which I think is just fantastic, and they collect all this great data, but they don't have to worry about contributing to a stock assessment that has an impact on commercial fisher and their jobs, regulating a public trust resource like how many fish people can catch. So they safeguard that data really, really tight. So they haven't wanted to make a commitment yet to that, but that's the direction that we're going, and it's a needed step. No doubt about it, because it's not that hard to develop an app to collect that data, as long as you give people the guidance to make it happen.
Such a great question. I could talk about this for the next hour, but I won't. I think the government has a huge role to play. Brett, I love your point on defining these standards. How we collect data is so important, and if everyone's running around collecting it in different ways, the job of reconciling all that later is nearly impossible. So there's a great story about someone who worked at Portland Metro Transit reaching out to Google, and the two of them basically building a data standard for public transportation. And that's why you can open up your iPhone and see when the next bus is going to arrive. And that's made public transportation relevant in an era where we've got Ubers and Lyfts running around. So I think defining that data standard for recreation is a key. Collection, I think, is an interesting question. I think communities and crowds can do a lot of the collection. I don't know if the government needs to do a huge collection effort depending on the resource, but it would certainly be great if there's budget for it. We're in the information economy, right? So data is just a huge currency, and so I think making sure the data is accurate and accessible, making sure contractors aren't, winning contracts where they can lock data up that should be public. These are going to become just again and again and again just such big wins that the government can really have for everyone to build off of.
And I would just agree and echo those same points. I mean, the BLM, we just released some of our own internal data standards for our ground transportation network, which includes our trail systems. And so we are moving along, and it would be nice to see some of those standardizations happen across the different agencies. But from a data collection standpoint, again, over 247 million acres, there are a lot of what we call linear features on the landscape that we don't even know where they are. And so how can we make a decision on them in planning, and how can we manage them long term? And we spend a lot of our time and energy and resources every year inventorying those assets to put them into our standards. And so we have talked internally, and we're trying to figure out a way to enable the public to crowdsource some of that information for us. They're out there. They're using those trails. Everybody's got a smartphone with an app or a Garmin GPS unit, and they're collecting that data already. And so I think it's going to be a challenge for our agency and probably the other federal agencies in the room of how do you empower the public to collect that information and bring it in and utilize it using our standards. So it's definitely something that's on our radar, and we're working hard to try to figure it out.
And one more thought on that, because once it's standardized and collected, then it should be published and it should be made accessible. And just one story of how that's already happening, I don't know if you guys heard, but rec.gov recently released an API, and this has all sorts of data in it, including historical reservations, I think going back almost a decade. And just as a small example for our company, that data was critical in us understanding where is camping already happening in the United States, and that guided our strategy of which markets we were going to go after. That data does not exist in any other place but that database. And so that API and that accessibility is absolutely key to our company growing, and I'm sure there's many, many other cases in which that could be happening.
I think Derek is going to close us out. Thank you again to our presenters. We started.
Oh, good job.